Yeah, I was in multiple facilities. So I was first started with a juvenile detention center because I did have charges. I had a probation officer, and that's where she placed me. I was there for, I think, the first time 3 months and the second time like 6 months. And this was all one long stretch, though. I was kind of back and forth. And what happens, and I'm not sure if this still happens today because this was all the way back in 2001, they would use juvenile detention centers as shelters when the shelters were full. So even if you didn't do anything wrong, they were putting you in there if you had nowhere to go.
Got it.
And so I was in a juvenile detention center. And then I was in what's called a residential treatment facility, which is supposed to help kids with, mental health issues, behavioral issues, things like that. And then I was in a lockdown facility. I'm not sure what the technical term for that was, but it was basically juvie, but you're in like a little house and the doors all lock and everything, but you're not in a jail cell. You're in like a cabin and you sleep in a room with like 12 other people. So it was the same. It just looked a little different.
And what was the process of coming out of this all?
What do you mean?
As
Like, how
in,
do you get
what?
out?
Yeah, I mean, how long do most young people stay in this? And in for yourself specifically, what was the end of this process?
So, this is a loaded question because there's
Okay.
multiple ways it happens. So, if you go in there because your parents voluntarily send you there, they can take you out. But like I said, that's very rare because they tell your parents right off the bat that your kid's going to manipulate you. So I think it all depends on your relationship with your parent. Some of them you cannot get out because if you're like me, I was a warden of the state. So the state had custody of me, my parents did not. So I was under their rule of thumb. I had to go to court hearings. So every 3 months they would have a court hearing. So when I first came to this facility that I was at the longest, I was told that I would be there for 3 months if I followed all the rules and I got through the level system. They have a level system that's based on the points that I was talking about. If I got through the level system, that I would be released in 90 days. Well, this is another thing that's completely messed up. And I've heard from, now I have friends that work in the children and youth system, and I have friends that work in the juvenile justice system, and I've heard the behind the scenes. And what happens is when you have a kid that is well behaved, let's say, in these places, a lot of times they will fight to keep them in because this is a $23 billion industry.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're making
Whoa.
$23 billion a year, 90%, which is Medicare, Medicaid, and um, state funded programs, grants, federal, local, all that funded. So it's a moneymaker. So you have a kid,
23 billion a year.
billion, yeah. So if you have a kid that's not really a behavioral problem anymore and they're in there, the they kind of fight to keep them in because that's a bed that's taken up. That's $500 a day that a kid is in there. And so I think that's kind of what happened with me. I'm not saying I was a perfect kid, but when I went in there, like I said, I kept my head down. I followed all the rules, and they would do some really weird things. Like, for example, I was on the level system and I think there was like 4 or 5 levels. I was on the highest level, or no, the second to highest level. And they would say, "We know that you're being manipulative because when you came in here, we were told that you have all these behavioral issues and now you're faking it because you're doing everything you're supposed to. And we think you're just faking it to get out of here. So we can't move you up to the 5th level, which is where you usually get released because we haven't seen the real you." So then what would
Wow.
happen? You have a kid, at the time I was 16 years old at this particular place. I was there from 15 to 17, almost right before my 18th birthday.
Okay.
So they would say, you're faking it and you need to stay here longer. And I'd be working my butt off, trying to behave, just thinking, I just want to get back to school and my friends and be normal. And then they would, tell me this. And I remember one particular time I had followed all the rules. I was there for six months at this point. I had gone to 2 court hearings where I was told I was going home and then told I had to come back for no reason. I hadn't acted out. And I remember crying when I got back, and we had you had a piece of duct tape in every room, and you had to say, "Can I cross?" And if you cross that piece of duct tape without asking, you would lose 10 points. Again, 10 points, you're on the privilege, whatever it is, and you sit and face the wall the whole next week. So I was extremely upset. And I tried to walk to my room before I threw something or whatever. And I didn't ask if I could cross. It didn't even cross my mind. I was so upset. And I got tackled because they use restraints there. I don't think I mentioned that.
Wow. Okay.
If you're doing anything that, there's all these rules that they're supposed to follow to restrain you, but they don't follow them. These are 21-year-old kids. And they threw me down on the ground and they basically strangled me. I couldn't breathe. And so what do you do? Fight or flight. I started fighting back. And that resulted in me, after 6 months of hard work, putting me back on level 1, starting all over. And I was just, at that point, I was crushed. I had given up. And it's just crazy to think about now because, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but a lot of kids, the recidivism rate is 80%, 70 to 80%. What that word means is kids in the system get put back in. Mm-hmm. And if it's not when they're a youth, it's when they're an adult. And it boggles my mind that I was able to get out of that because pretty much everyone I was in there with couldn't. Because you just start to lose touch with reality when you're told these are the rules, this is what you do, this is how you get out, and then that's not followed, and you're physically abused and things like that by these people that you're supposed to trust, that your parents are trusting. It's just, how do you deal with that as a child? And I was older, I was there from 15 to almost 18. You have kids in there that are 11 years old.
Wow.